Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. The death toll in Gaza now believed to be more than 40,500 people, with many more missing. Daily violence destroying refugee camps, quickly taking over the occupied West Bank. Ceasefire talks, though, not going anywhere. Through all of this, protests are continuing globally, while here in Connecticut, movements are seeing new momentum, with students back on campus where they were torn away from encampments and many arrested, from Yale to UConn to Middletown. Those students now in court. Campaigning and political events are being disrupted, with a call for an arms embargo on Israel and then land justice for Palestinians. In Connecticut, divestment calls have been the priority, trying to get schools and organizations to divest from those funding and aiding Israel, while also calling out the war industry and companies like Pratt and Whitney, which produces the F-135 engine, which powers Israel's F-35 fighter jets. That activism has gotten its fair share of pushback and some aggression, those questioning the effectiveness, but protests still continue. Here with me now, a UConn student politically involved from the state capitol to national campaigns, and an activist, most recently joining the sit-in at the Democratic National Convention while there as a volunteer. Haritha Subramanian, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me today. It's been a dream of mine to be here in the Fox 61 studio, so thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. So, as I said, you were a volunteer at the DNC in Chicago. We spoke on the show last week with Esam, one of Connecticut's delegates. He was the one present vote for Connecticut, and he calls himself, a ceasefire delegate representing West Hartford. We know from his experience and from others who were there in Chicago and at the convention, they thought Palestine would kind of be one of the main centers of conversation throughout those 4 days, but many felt it was silence, and Esam telling us at times a little bit aggressively. What was your experience there? Obviously, they're volunteering, supporting the Harris-Walz ticket, but also supporting an end to the war in Gaza. So start off, just tell me a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, of course. First off, the Democratic National Convention, super exciting. It was so thrilling to be in that space and feel the energy for the Harris-Walz campaign, and also feel the energy around the ceasefire movement, the uncommitted movement. And I think part of the reason, a lot of people have actually been drawing comparisons to this year's convention, to the one in 1968, and we'll remember all the anti-war protests that were happening in 1968, mostly led by college students, also in Chicago. So it's a great callback to history. This year, though, I think the energy was there. People were very strong about their beliefs and their message to end this genocide in Gaza and fight towards a ceasefire and an arms embargo. But most of us, if not all of us, we all felt silenced. One of the biggest things that the uncommitted movement was focused on up there was to get a Palestinian American speaker at the DNC. And a huge point there is that was the bare minimum. That is at the minimum what we wanted.
Right.
Because there were family members of an Israeli American hostage speaking. And I'm so glad that they shared their story. We are fully in support of that. But I think it's imperative to kind of hear both sides, right? I think we want a Palestinian voice up there. Unfortunately, the sit-in lasted almost 24 hours. I myself was there until 3 a.m.
Right.
And we couldn't even get that. And that was such a disappointment to all of us. Met several congressional members from the squad, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and several others stood in solidarity with us.
Right.
And we are so grateful to their support and Abbas for leading that movement. But I will say we fully felt silent during that sit-in. Several Palestinian Americans shared their stories, and an Israeli American who had stepped down from the Biden administration because of the response to the war in Gaza.
And you yourself specifically kind of, straddling that line between organizing and activism, working in politics, whether, your time as an intern at the state capitol or your role in national campaigning. Now, specifically with Palestine, we have been seeing a lot of people say that, especially during, the 2024 presidential election cycle, that it's not the time or the place. From your position, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. First off, it is the time, it is the place. And I know a lot of people might see the Democrats who are speaking against the actions of their party to be kind of controversial and interesting, to say the least. But I think right now we're living in a time where the election is between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and you get a lot of these Democrats who, obviously, we definitely do not want Trump in office. That poses a great danger to human rights right here in America. But that doesn't mean that we can't criticize our own party. That doesn't mean that we can't have calls to action within our own party. I know this is a question that I've had to kind of deal with myself and kind of see how I fit in. Like, how do I support the party and be part in all of these campaigns, while also simultaneously calling for the ceasefire. Right. And the way that I go about that is understanding that politicians, even if votes are not being taken away from them, they still have a duty to serve what the public is asking for, right? And I always say to people, there's a huge group of people who might not choose to vote in this election because of this issue. Right. And to them, I say, that's not an option here. We still have to vote. We still have to go to the polls this November. It's just that difference between, making that vote in a fully good conscience versus being, I guess they're less worse.
So a little bit of a shift from that uncommitted movement during the primary, with a lot of Democrats using that as an option to voice their support. I know specifically voters I spoke with here in Connecticut felt like because the primary was so late, President Biden had already been chosen, so they felt like that was a way for them to kind of use their voice. But you're saying now more of a shift that voting, uncommitted or not voting at all in the general election isn't really an option.
Yeah, I just don't think we can go without not voting at all, because in Connecticut, you might think, we're a safe blue state. In terms of the presidential election, I would say yes, but there are also those down ballot races here in Connecticut that you're also going to be voting for, including our state house, our state senate. Right. So if you don't show up to vote, you're not voting for those positions either. Right. And I think it is very important to keep the state house and the state senate blue as much as we can.
And you are obviously a student at UConn, and our whole state, our whole world has seen this student encampment movement that we kind of saw kick up at the end of last school year, around May. Everyone went on summer break. A lot of people graduated, but students are back on campus. Yale, Wesleyan have long histories of these sorts of protests, but UConn, however, really organized something which, usually doesn't touch the state campus. Tell me a little bit about that. And I know we've already seen, some movement, some demonstrations since students got back on campus just a few days ago.
Yeah. First off, I think it's a huge testament to the organizing efforts to our students. I think it's absolutely wonderful that we were able to use our voices and advocate for a free Palestine. Unfortunately, I feel like our voices are being silenced and kind of siloed, and I don't think that's fair to our democracy, to supporting our activism. 26 students should not have been arrested at UConn. No student should have had to be arrested for simply peacefully protesting by encampments and protesting outside. We really did try to comply with all the rules. And I think going forward, we're still continuing to do that. Right. It's just sometimes we feel like we've lost hope. And I think that keeping up the hope, keeping up the stamina, keeping up the energy for something we believe so strong in is super essential. So keeping that energy strong while also ensuring that we are getting people out there to vote. You might not agree with the candidate 100%. You never will. Politics doesn't work like that. So, this is our time for activism. Yeah. And this is the time to keep the candidate accountable. You have more of a chance to voice your concerns and actually have the candidate enact them if you do that during the election season rather than once they're already in office.
And in our last minute here, the Gen Z vote and the young vote has proven extremely important in past elections, from those I'm speaking with, extremely important and potentially a deciding factor in this election as well. As someone who's there with fellow students, what are some of those conversations looking like for those who maybe feel like they're a little bit disenfranchised by the big two-party system, maybe not happy with either candidate? Just tell me a little bit about what some of those future-looking conversations are sounding like with your fellow students.
Yeah, I think for me it's more of a shift of understanding that these are the two choices we have now, but that doesn't mean we can't plan for the future. We still have a movement. It might not happen today. Everything that we want might not happen today, but we are getting there. It's a slow-moving process. The activism and the people who support it are behind it, and in the future, we hope to see representation that is more indicative of what the young voters want, what we are looking for. But we have to understand that's not going to happen today. But voting for the Harris-Walz campaign and still voting at all is going to take us one step closer to there. None of this happens overnight. And it's still important to participate in our democracy, even though you might not be fully a fan of it.
Well, Haritha, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing a little bit of insight and taking a couple minutes to chat. We really appreciate it.
Of course, thank you so much.
There's still more to come here, though, on The Real Story. August 31st honored International Overdose Day. We're sitting down with a state senator who chairs the Public Health Committee. He's drafted Connecticut laws supporting substance abuse services and is charting the path forward. A proponent of harm reduction centers and other ideas to stop staggering overdose statistics. That and more after the break. Stay with us.